Alright, what's up? Welcome. We are on the road. We had pressing business. It's business. It's business time. I'm drinking a little business juice as Jamie sleeps away the night. It's business. It's business juice. And no, it is not. What's he got? A rum and a Coke? What's he got? A Jack and Coke? Hell no. That's a straight iced espresso with extra espresso and no ice. Welcome. Why are we doing tonight when I said what we would do is that I got my sipping jug. I got a sipping jug. Why are we doing this? Why is it? It looks kind of dumb in the background. Why has he got a big jug of something in the background? Well, because I'm about halfway through the Patrick Wood book. And I know everybody requested that next. But the thing is, Patrick Wood said he would come on, but he had surgery. So he's not feeling great. So then it was like, well, I'd rather have him on when we talk about it. But we need to wait till he feels better from his surgery. So pray for Patrick Wood. I think he had some pretty serious surgery. But he did say he wanted to come on. And that'll work out better anyway, because turns out I got a hold of Dr. John Coleman's Tavistock book. Now, this is the classic Tavistock expose. It's the first one from 2005, years after he wrote his Committee of 300 book, which we've already covered. So why are we covering this? Well, because, as somebody mentioned, why are we doing this again? Because there's a lot of information in Dr. Coleman's Tavistock book that is not in Daniel Eslin's book. Now, Daniel Eslin's book is a good book, and it utilizes Dr. Coleman's book, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in Dr. Coleman's Tavistock book which gets into the history of British psychological warfare, the Office of Intelligence, wartime intelligence, on and on, special operations executive. A lot of information that we don't find in other texts which cover other elements. Eslin's book is a lot more relevant to things like pop culture, which is fine because he gets into that, in the latter chapters of his Tavistock book. So, and we just did the interview with Daniel Eslin. If you didn't see that, that's on Rockfin. I put it up on here, but then the algorithm immediately killed it. So I was like, just forget it. So I moved it to Rockfin, and it's on my Rumble and my YouTube and my website. So Daniel Eslin, of course, one of the most well-known journalists of Latin, Central, South America. Most of his stuff is in Spanish. So if you go to his channel, he's got almost 300,000 subscribers. We had a great discussion for about an hour on religious corruption, the mafia, the Vatican. So go watch that. And then, it's pretty wild, all the stuff with Tucker, isn't it? So I'm guessing, I guess Klaus just made a few calls, right? We went too far in my spoof, and Klaus got on the horn. I want to get rid of the man. Place him on the unemployment. Put Tucker on the universal basic income. I am not happy. I was joking, by the way. Somebody, I think, thought I was serious when I was saying Klaus got Tucker fired because I was on that Tucker special. That was a joke. But to be serious, if you heard Lord Voldemort today, and he played the AOC clip where, like, 2 days ago, isn't that crazy? AOC, sexy little communist. She's not the sexy communist, by the way. I'm just joking. AOC was like, he's calling for violence. Clearly calling for violence. It's like, nobody called for violence. What are you talking about? Just lies, obviously crazy lies. So they're making their move. All right, let's get into Dr. John Coleman's Tavistock book. And this is, I didn't get a hold of a physical copy, by the way. If you get the physical copies, they're ridiculous. There's one on Amazon for $4,000. Obviously, that's not what I bought. So, yeah, hopefully I didn't bring the curse. It is pretty wild, though. What do you mean, where's the best place to check the Dyer show? You mean the Tucker Carlson special with me? We put the link under literally like 50 clips. So, Dr. John Coleman. Now we know he's the supposed, when I say supposed, I don't mean that he's lying. I just mean I don't know. The supposed former British intelligence writer who wrote the famous Committee of 300 book, which argues that there is a 300 or so people at the top of Beberg, these kinds of things, right? And that top 300 of CFR and trilateral Beberg and all that. I don't know. Have you all just assumed it was Michael Franzese? I'm not dissing Michael Franzese, but I'm saying people just assume that's what I was talking about. Who has been as a famous gangster longer than Michael Franzese, who's had movies made about, well, not totally about him, but who else is it? There's only two options. Literally only two options of two famous living mobsters that we did the interview with. And half y'all got it right, half y'all got it wrong. You don't know your mobsters. By the way, I've been going deeper and deeper into mob stuff, so I'm gonna be a mob historian, I guess, eventually. But call me in about 5 years. Dan Bongino, was he in the mob? It's not Dan Bongino, by the way. How many mobsters are there that are famous out there? I'm talking about super famous. There's only two that are super famous. Anyway, I don't know when they'll post it. You guys it's gonna blow you away when they post an interview. It'll be posted on his channel probably in a few weeks. So no, it's not Martin Scorsese. It's not Leo DiCappuccino, and it's not Al Pacino, the most famous living mobster. It's not Orson or Marlon Brando. All right. Now, the first thing that was really interesting, by the way, if you want to support the show, you can do so via the super chat function, was the references to, it's not Joey Diaz, the references to Oswald Spengler. I didn't expect Dr. Coleman to get into Oswald Spengler. And he says that, and we've done videos on this channel years ago about the decline of the West and Spengler's thesis. For those that don't know, Spengler's thesis is that every civilization has a life cycle to it. So there's a birth, right, a growth, flourishing, apogee, and then a decline, and then a collapse, and then there's a transition to a new civilization. And he characterizes past civilizations like the Babylonians or whatever. He talks about the Magians, right? This was, I think, the Chaldeans and Babylonians, or the Magian society. And then he talks about the Greeks. I forget what term he uses for the Greeks, something to do with their emphasis on eternality or something, and then Western civilization, according to Spengler, is Faustian, right? Man makes a Faustian bargain with technology. And Spengler predicted, and he didn't just write Decline of the West, he also wrote about socialism in Prussia, and he wrote some other books about how other groups and other peoples would end up taking over the West and its civilizational technology to rule over the West. The West would collapse and give rise to other powers that would run the West. That's Spengler's thesis, basically. And so what surprised me was that Spengler wasn't writing a book that was like a cookbook on how to destroy society. But Tavistock ended up seeing the legitimacy to weaponizing the section of Spengler's thesis about the decline of the West. That we're going to see the decline of the West. And so basically the Tavistock's just saying, oh yeah, let's take that and make it happen. Make it happen. Do it. Let's do it. This is our thing. Let's make it happen. Make it happen. Gotta make it happen. Right? Liam Gallagher style, quoting old Oasis songs. So Tavistock becomes fascinated with, and we're going to get into more of the history, right? The 1936 text of Spengler and the idea of creating the conditions for the collapse of the older orders to bring in the new technocratic world, the technocratic order. And guess what? Coleman's Tavistock book, it's all the same usual suspects in our Ratiou Milner Fabian book. So it's all the Milner Fabian crew that are behind Tavistock. And so that confirms that I think Coleman's thesis is probably pretty much correct. Every now and then in these kinds of texts, and I would class Coleman's books kind of with Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. What's another one we just covered like this? Oh, the Rakovsky interrogation. Right, these are supposed insiders who are giving us this spiel, right? And it's not that there can't be whistleblowers, but we often have to be measured in we don't want to immediately accept every whistleblower, because sometimes the establishment puts out fake whistleblowers or disinfo agents. So we don't want to immediately jump on every so-called whistleblower. We want to have a bit of a measured consideration and hesitancy, but we also don't want to be totally blackpilled. Like, oh no, nobody ever, divulges the truth. Neither of those is the case. So in the books that we class in this kind of potential leak category, the likely bin, right? Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, Dr. Coleman's books, these kinds of texts, they're going to be, I think, determined. Oh, the day tapes, right? The day tapes are another example of this. They're going to be classified on the basis of how accurate are their predictions and how accurate is the information insofar as it jives with other similar types of texts or other texts that are more substantial. For example, Tragedy and Hope is more authoritative than Dr. John Coleman's books. Why? Because Dr. John Coleman is a whistleblower. Carol Quigley is not. Dr. Quigley is a defender of the existing power structure and system. So his book counts more authoritative, you see. So what are we going to do? So what do we say? Well, let's look through the text and let's see if Dr. Coleman's analysis holds up. And certainly the Committee of 300 book had many elements that were correct. But not everybody's going to get everything 100%, because nobody knows exactly. And even the elite, the power structure itself, they don't know. They're not infallible. They're not omnipresent. Not everything that they roll out goes their way. So just because not everything that Dr. Coleman said was exactly what happened doesn't mean that it's false. If we're looking at, 80, 90% of what he talks about being correct and corroborated with what we read in Quigley and all the other global elite writings, then we can class this as a reliable leak. So he begins by talking about the Committee of 300, and it's the same people behind the Fabian Socialist Milner group that want to engineer the decline of the West. And so this is a stronger thesis than what I'm really getting tired of hearing, which is it's all incompetent people. Everything's incompetent. We're at an Airbnb, so this is not my kitchen. This is a kind of a small Airbnb, so there's not really any other place to be. I could be in the closet with you, but then if I come out, I'm coming out of the closet with you guys, and that might be a little fake and gray. Milner Fabian's Decline of the West. We need a new model, and that new model will be the Technocratic Fabian model. External powers will be used, according to Spengler and according to this plan, to intentionally collapse. So Spengler's academic thesis actually becomes a weapon for the Fabians and for the Tavistock Institute, according to Dr. Coleman. How do they do this? Well, the study of civilizational collapse at all levels is done in the nth degree to figure out how to create division and the fracturing of society at all levels and in all ways. Promote division and fracturing in all forms. And by so doing, pushing alien elements and alien ideas into the civilization will then create the complete collapse of the civilization. It doesn't have to happen overnight. It's a gradual model, as we know. That's the Fabian slow kill model, which is much more effective than do everything, overnight, heavy-handed dictatorship. No. Do it slow. Now, you might end up with a world socialist dictator like we see in Brave New World, right? You might get a Mustafa Mond, but that's at the end goal. You're going to gradually erode away civil liberties, this kind of stuff. Freedom of speech, freedom of commerce, freedom of religion, right? All of those things that make up the existing order. And I'm not saying that every one of those is perfect, but the existing order has to give way to the new order is the point. So civilizational collapse is studied in an nth degree to weaponize the collapse, and that's key. And how is that done? By simply doing a few key things, not just division of society, but provoking the division of society and the collapse of society by inverting society and intentionally placing unworthy individuals and people in positions of power. Kakistocracy. Government by corrupt people, government by thieves, government by just total degenerate oligarchs, basically. And that's not president level only. That's like basically all of the powerful positions, the judiciary, Congress, Senate, president. Intentionally get more and more ridiculous till we get, burrito supreme or what, beef supreme, right? Idiocracy. Civilizational collapse is then studied, as you said, through these means and methods. And one of the key things that popped up that he spends a lot of time on is this item here. And this is called Wellington House. Wellington House is the predecessor to Tavistock. So before we had Tavistock studying shell shock and then being promoted into something at Sussex University and then becoming its own clinic with Rockefeller money, it was first Wellington House, the name for Britain's War Propaganda Bureau. Now, this is all World War I era. So we're going to go back to World War I. We're going to go back to, the Black Hand and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, done according to the thesis of Coleman, exactly what Christian Rakovsky, the socialist interrogated under the NKVD, said. This was done by the same people, by this group, this elite Milner Fabian circle. And it was done to intentionally create and cause that war. Why was this war? Well, this war was due to, firstly, Britain's distaste for German engineering and economic superiority. Germany was on the rise, and Britain didn't like that. Britain, of course, being a seafaring empire. And so Wellington House was tasked with going full bore with a lot of new sort of revolutionary for the time propaganda methods. And this leads to a bunch of characters cooking up cartoons, spitting out countless. There was a name for these weird cartoons they would do in Britain, kind of like pulp cartoons. They have a weird British name. I don't know what they're called, or motorized rolling hams. No, I'm joking. I don't know what they're called, right? Some kind of weird Harry Potter style name. And they would portray the Kaiser as this horrible, barbaric figure. The Hun, that's something that H.G. Wells cooked up as a propagandist. And so they put out 1,160 pamphlets throughout this time period. All kinds of pamphlets, published by Hodder and Selton, Oxford University, Macmillan, Thomas Nelson. Like everything was just spitting out the crazy propaganda, and they would like picture different German guys as butchering and chopping up, in cartoon form, random citizens. It was all made up. It's all fake. But the propaganda wasn't that sophisticated this time. It worked well enough, right? H.G. Wells, as you see, is mentioned here, including G.K. Chesterton, who was invited. So the British Propaganda Bureau invited 25 leading British authors to Wellington House to discover how to promote Britain during World War One. And then even Arthur Conan Doyle. So this is Sherlock Holmes. Thomas Hardy, H.G. Wells, and Rudyard Kipling, who didn't attend but was invited. But G.K. Chesterton did, which is odd. Hold on, I gotta put the air on because I'm gonna start sneezing again. Oh man. So, there is your history of the origins of Tavistock prior to Tavistock, which is Wellington House, the British Propaganda Bureau for World War One. And one of the things they cooked up that made this successful was they weaponized and created this term isolationist. So America wasn't interested in this war, and they created a term to demonize people that didn't want to go to war. And that term, at this time they made up, was called isolationist. So if you didn't want to be in the war, you had this negative term attached to you. And this is similar to other strategies that they cooked up. The white feather. Have you heard of this? Right? There's a movie with Heath Ledger called The Four Feathers. Heath Ledger and Kate Hudson. And basically, if you didn't want to go to war, people would give you a white feather and submit you were a coward. But that was actually something cooked up by early British propaganda strategists to de-incentivize people not signing up for the war effort. So isolationist is one of the first terms, according to Dr. Coleman, weaponized by Tavistock as a kind of psyop. So the earliest figures that begin to really be key when Tavistock becomes its own entity is the figures of Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann, Dr. Kurt Lewin, and John Rawlings Rees. These are the most important characters at Tavistock. And they're important because if you are familiar with Lewin, then you know that this is also a Frankfurt School guy. So, yes, absolutely. Key overlap between Frankfurt School and Tavistock. And that's not by accident, because some of these figures, including Dr. Kurt Lewin and others, will work hat in hand with the U.S. academic, psychological, and industrial complex as well. In fact, Kurt Lewin will be invited to the United States. He will lecture and work at MIT. He will lecture and work at Rand Corporation, which is basically like America's version of Tavistock in a way. And in fact, Tavistock is involved in the creation of Stanford Research Institute. So all these figures are basically going to mirror and set up the same things in the United States that they have going on in the UK. And this is no different than the mirroring projects that we see with Pratt House and Chatham House, right? Pratt House in New York is the model, based on the model of Chatham House in the UK. And those are all modeled on the roundtable groups, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. CFR, Trilateral, they're modeled on those same structures. Same thing. Same model for different countries. They work together, you see. Other key figures at this time in the earliest days of Tavistock include Walter Lippmann, Arnold Toynbee. Bernays and Lippmann, for example, really help help Woodrow Wilson get a lot of his unpopular, controversial plans through. And so Woodrow Wilson apparently wrote a book. I didn't know that, but it was something to do with justice. I forget the name of it, but it turns out this was actually written by some other Fabian socialist, according to Dr. Coleman. So Dr. Coleman argues that it wasn't Woodrow Wilson that wrote this book. Woodrow Wilson had it ghostwritten by this Fabian socialist guy. I forget the name, but this is what explains so many key elements coming into play for where we are today in the technocratic order under the Wilson administration. It's really the period of Woodrow Wilson, not just in terms of like World War I and that stuff, but the Federal Reserve Act and all that stuff with Colonel Edwin Mandell House being the agent of the Fabian socialists in England, working and using Woodrow Wilson and pushing those policies, not just the freedoms, all of that. And it's the four freedoms, right? Isn't that right? I'm going from memory. And they were also involved in helping to set up the inquiry. So all these same people set up the first proto-intelligence group prior to the OSS. Okay, so yes, 1942 OSS. Then you get 47 CIA. Prior to all that, go back to Woodrow Wilson. The intelligence apparatus is called the inquiry, and we've covered this many, many times. But a lot of these people come out of, so September 1917, set up by Woodrow Wilson. This is a proto-intelligence group for America. Heads of research were, look at that. Who? Walter Lippmann. Who's Walter Lippmann? Ad man, right? Public opinion. The creation of public opinion. And a Tavistock man. So prior to OSS and prior to CIA, Woodrow Wilson's era of intelligence was all of these academics, 150 academics, including Colonel Edward Mandell House, who was the operative of the Milner Fabian circles, and these other individuals who are Tavistock people. Now, they also are the ones that draw up the post-World War I reparations. Give me my reparations post-World War I, which basically means Germany forever in debt, right? Are you starting to see how this stuff works now? If you would hit like and share, thank you guys so much. So, Wellington House outlines anti-German propaganda. They pioneer a lot of stuff. And he makes a claim. I don't know if he meant to make this claim, because this Tavistock book is from 2005. So it's right after, Bush, Big 9 event and the Iraq War and invasion of Afghanistan. But he says that Wellington House came up with this idea of creating manifestos. So Manifest Destiny, the manifesto, Woodrow Wilson's manifesto, he says, was cooked up by Wellington House, right? The 14 points, right? That's these people. Peace in our time. Okay, this goober didn't come up with any of that. It was all these people. Does that make sense? You understand that? So there's that. Dr. Coleman argues that Woodrow Wilson himself embodied the strategies of Bakunin. They were consistently propaganda strategies and lies. Of course, the Federal Reserve being the biggest element of this. And the idea would be that eventually at this time, with League of Nations, there was a move then to transition America into a Fabian socialist country. Now, that didn't work, right? Woodrow Wilson's schemes didn't end up working out. They did get the Federal Reserve, but the rest of it didn't pan out. The League of Nations failed. but it was intended to be the Fabian Socialist Revolution then. One thing he noticed that was pretty exciting that I didn't know about was that the propaganda that Wellington House cooked up against the Kaiser is the exact same propaganda for Saddam Hussein, which is insane. That's Saddam insane. He was called the Butcher, right? They called the Kaiser the Butcher, and the Kaiser was like just this kooky dude that liked to wear military outfits, and he certainly wasn't any kind of butcher. But the propaganda called him the Butcher, the Beast, and then of course they called Saddam the Beast of Baghdad, and that was he says that Tavistock drew up both of those. It's the same, the Beast, right? And we see that in the last 20 years, post Saddam, and they called Saddam Tiny Mustache Man too, right? Every enemy, every villain is Tiny Mustache Man. Putin is Tiny Mustache Man. That is all basic Tavistock propaganda. Now you say, well, wait a minute. What about Goebbels? Wasn't he a tiny mustache man? Goebbels was a big fan of Lewin. Goebbels liked and appreciated the strategies and techniques of Tavistock. Future shocks, as we said, where does that come from? What is that? We've been covering that, but he covers it as well. Future shocks are the idea of psychological operations that are psychologically destabilizing to the extent that you are put into a discombobulated state that makes you easier to accept the next phase of the propaganda. So future shocks, again, that is of course one of Toffler's books, which we'll eventually get to. And I know somebody said it's a trilogy. I know it's a trilogy. The next big discovery of these people, and this is pretty wild at this time, that was also first used by Woodrow Wilson, was public opinion. The notion of public opinion didn't exist prior to this. Public opinion is created under Woodrow Wilson via Bernays and Lippmann. Now you can begin to see why the admin are really important for this, right? We get the Great Depression not too long after some of these events, especially the Federal Reserve. No shocker, post-Federal Reserve, we get the stock market crash, Great Depression. And he claims, I've not seen this, but I wouldn't be surprised. But, we've covered Lord Halford Mackinder's Heartland theory, Heartland versus Rimland. Mackinder is repeating the British imperial attitude of how to understand and control the world from their naval perspective, right? Because they're a sea nation versus a land nation. So controlling the Eurasian heartland versus Rimland. Controlling the Eurasian heartland is the British imperial model of how you control the world. That's famously from Lord Halford Mackinder. But he says that elsewhere, Halford Mackinder noted that it would be absolutely necessary to bring in a global government to preserve the whatever remnants of the British Empire. Well, the British Empire failed, and then we get the American Empire. But the American Empire was reconquered by the Milner-Fabian Society via these people and their British intelligence establishment setting up the American intelligence apparatus. That's how it was reconquered. And so he argues that Lord Halford Mackinder's statement of we must have world government and we will have it via any means is applying to the plans that they rolled out via the creation of the OSS and the CIA. Now, he even says, apparently, this is I have not read this in Mackinder. Mackinder has that famous essay on Heartland Rimland theory in that book on democracy or whatever, but he says that Mackinder also said that if we have to create a world socialist dictatorship, that's also fine. But that doesn't seem far-fetched because that's what John Ruskin also said. And John Ruskin was one of these characters, right? One of these Milner characters who wanted to set up this world socialist a Fabian world socialist system. I was going to look and see if it listed his ideas of socialism, but I know this is correct because it comes up in comes up in a lot of these texts. Well, turns out this thing is huge. So Ruskin turned to spiritualism and seances. That's interesting. I think that's mentioned in Tragedy and Hope, by the way. But yeah, if I recall right, he explicitly favored a world socialist federation. Was the view that Ruskin had. And Ruskin, if I recall, was buddies. He was part of the Rhodes thing, right? So he was contemporary with Cecil Rhodes. But getting back to the Coleman text, he notes that Wellington House, one of the key figures there was Arnold Toynbee, another one of these historians British historian guys who's part of the Tavistock early phases and structure. Toynbee was running Wellington House. So Toynbee was kind of the key guy at Wellington House before it was Tavistock. And Toynbee, also a Fabian socialist, wanted this one world order that we talked about. Toynbee ended up going to, who was close to Halford Mackinder, working at Wellington House, ended up going to the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the London University. And then quote from, I don't know if this is both of them, probably, we must have world state, and it doesn't matter what, by any means, basically. World state by any means is their motto, basically. Toynbee said that mass mind control would be necessary to bring in this world state and ultimately would end the family. So he's explicit about ending the family. And he said that if you read H.G. Wells' Open Conspiracy is talking about this. Well, wouldn't you know, guys, guess what? We've lectured through Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. We've lectured through New World Order by H.G. Wells. We've also lectured through Edward Bernays' Propaganda. That's one of our classic old school global elite texts that we've lectured through. But Bernays didn't just write that. There were also books that he wrote about. There's one I gotta get that I wasn't familiar with. He wrote, Lippmann, because Lippmann and Bernays were working together. Walter Lippmann wrote Public Opinion in 1922. That's about the creating of and steering of public opinion. And that's one of the key things they really do in this early period is 1920s. They start to work with and perfect the science of social engineering public opinion. And so if we're going to get people to a single technocratic world state and no family, it's going to take a lot. And it's not going to be done in one generation. Hence the slow kill Fabian model. It's going to take time to do that. It's going to take time, a whole lot of precious time. It's going to take patience and time. It's going to take money, a whole lot of spending money to do it right. Tavistock's got its mindset on you. All right. Who put the money into Wellington House? The Rockefellers and the UK monarchy. No surprise there. What's one of the first things they cooked up beyond the creation of public opinion? Groupthink. Groupthink and group mind. Now, it's not just creating the idea of it. It's getting everybody into consensus reality. That's all Tavistock stuff. And they realized that engineering social and mass consent is not just a matter of effective propaganda. The best way to do that is to control the leaders of groups, because those are the opinion makers. I can't read my note. Something is fake. Something is fake and made up by Tavistock. Rolling? I don't know what that means. One of the key things that Tavistock decided would be necessary actually coincides with what you might have heard Rachel talking about recently, the degrading and destruction of women. So Tavistock was actually really interested in the early phases, the 1920s and 30s. We'll talk about this in a minute. Did you know there was a mini SEX revolution in the 20s and 30s? Absolutely. 20s and 30s were like a proto-1960s. And Tavistock was very interested in this and studied it. In fact, they even studied to a scientific degree women's hairstyles, the women bobbing their hair, flappers, the dresses, and the hemlines coming higher and higher up on the dresses. That was all studied by Tavistock. No joke. And so for those of you for many years who've heard us talk about culture creation, this is it. Okay, pop culture, there's an element of it which is organic. Trends come about, they pop up, things get popular. A lot of it is not organic. A lot of it is created. And there's even movies about this. If you watch Josie and the Pussycats, you'll notice that there's all these scientists in labs studying, creating the pop culture in this goofy comedy movie. That's pretty close to the truth when it comes to Tavistock. And in fact, if you read the Space Trilogy of C.S. Lewis, the third Space Trilogy is basically Tavistock. The Nice Institute is Tavistock. But in order to completely change society, one of the key focal points of society, reproduction, femininity, would have to be completely altered. And you do that through any and every means of attacking and degrading femininity, classical femininity, right? Feminine virtues, feminine traits. And also by doing that, the men will fail as well. Because, right, men typically are doing things, historically speaking, right, to gain a wife, gain a house, gain land, right, provide for offspring. Well, if you destroy the women, dudes are screwed, and dudes will just become, INCELs or whatever. And so you can see then that Tavistock was very interested in liberating people in every Skittles way. And they studied the 1920s and 30s Skittles stuff. So you think that the societal changes that are occurring now, that, they're just random and we've never seen anything like this. No, we've already seen this. Babylon Berlin, which is a modern German TV show, which takes place during the time of what I'm talking about, right? 1920s, 30s Berlin. I mean, it looks like San Francisco now. So these things can be organic. I'm not saying that everything is planned. I'm saying that, however, it is not always organic, and particularly the society that we live under. The pop culture, the culture is completely designed and rolled out and promoted. And hopefully every one of you that has some degree of discernment left can see that. Because isn't it odd that all the Fortune 100 and the Fortune 500 have rolled all the same things out in the last few years? Why is that? Is it just market shares? But it hurts their market. Go woke, go broke. Well, why do they keep doing it? Because it's an agenda. It's not incompetent people. It is a strategy of hastening civilizational collapse that Tavistock pioneered and has as their game plan, including the pushing of everything crazy. Now, why would they push everything crazy? Well, one of the key Tavistock figures, Dr. Kurt Lewin, came up with a psychological warfare strategy called changing identity a long time ago, way before the idea that you can identify as whatever you want nowadays. This is all old stuff. Did you know that? You think you're part of some new trend? We've never seen nothing like this before. Yes, you have. 20s and 30s. So you have to understand that countless think tanks, countless foundations, work around the clock to create the situations for social revolution and social change, to create the situations for civilizational change, culture change, change agents, culture change agents, culture revolutions, color revolutions. It's all from the same people. Okay? And again, it does not mean everything is controlled. Plenty of musicians out there who make music and have fun, and they're not told what to do by some dude on a phone from Tavistock. But it's a symbiotic relationship where the pop culture indoctrinates the youth and the people immersed in it, and then the people immersed in it then repeat back in a feedback loop what they're indoctrinated with through the culture. But who moves the culture? It's these people, the social engineers. It's the people like John Rawlings Rees, Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays. Okay, so we've all heard the famous quote from Bernays at the beginning of Propaganda, where he says, "We are ruled by an invisible secret government and secret elite whose names no one knows, but who determine our desires through mass advertising, mass communication, etc., etc." Do you know who he's talking about? He's talking about Tavistock. These people. That mysterious quote, I wonder what it's about. It's about British intelligence, who set up Wellington House, and then who set up Tavistock. That's who he's talking about. So, let's see. I'm trying to figure out if I should keep with his pace or jump ahead. Let's keep with his pace. So, for example, he mentions, not me, but backing up what we saw in the Ratio book, which we lectured through at least the first 300 or 400 pages of that book. We're almost done with it, but it's like a 500-page book, but 400 or 500 page. But, Ratio had said that the EU was a Fabian institution. Yes, Dr. Coleman says correct. The EU is a Fabian institution. World War I was hatched, as we said, by Lord Grey due to British envy and hatred of Germany. And this was all done via psyops from Wellington House. We already said all that. So let's get down. A lot of this, again, parallels well with Quigley. And so one of the things that Tavistock cooked up, this is pretty wild. Well, before we get to the strategies of the three system response, let me go back to the 1920s, 30s stuff. So the 1920s and 30s were as we said, a pre-60s sexual revolution. So there's a lot of economic collapse, moral collapse, and rot in the 1920s and 30s. And this is part and parcel with the not just the U.S. stock crash, but also a world depression. World depression feeds into the moral chaos, right? Tavistock played a key role in a lot of this, and even Spengler noted that the 20s and 30s were a period of loose morals and revolution, where we started to see basically the OnlyFans and the mass prostitution of that time on a wide scale. And he says that you can see this in the Flappers, you see this in this time period, in the writings of James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence, and F. Scott Fitzgerald's Gatsby is really trying to capture this decadent period. Also, Skittles became very open and popular, particularly, as we said, in Germany, Berlin, but also in the United States as well. And this was meant to be a shock. So the shock that was intended to be conveyed at that time by young people in their revolution was a shock that would part and parcel be why they would call them future shocks, these cultural revolutions. And we think back to women like, I didn't actually realize that Joan Crawford was one of the first It girls. Did you know that? So the first two It girls, and that I don't even know, but probably It girl was probably cooked up by Tavistock, because if I recall, it is a thing from Britain, the term It girl. So are you beginning to see that these pop culture things like It girl, remember Paris Hilton was an It girl? Do you think she was the first? No. The first was back in the 19 teens and 20s when Joan Crawford was first a famous actress. She was the it girl of that time in the 1920s. And then at the same time, the other it girl was Louise Brooks. And so you can see that she had this kind of unique bobbed haircut, right? And that was a style revolution at that time that conveyed this kind of, wild and crazy party attitude. And it was revolutionary for women to have, hair this short, right? Whoa. And to dress in this kind of a way at that time. But, and again, I don't know this is the case, but I feel like Tavistock had to be behind It Girl, right? I mean, that had to be something they came up with. So, anyway. And then, and as you can imagine, Hollywood actually plays a key role in this as utilizing a lot of these Tavistock ideas, because Hollywood then projects this into the mass mind, and all the girls begin dressing like this, you see. That's studied and manufactured via Tavistock. That's the point here. A lot of the pop culture and the music at this time, some of it was getting really weird and experimental. That was all studied. I feel like German Expressionism was probably part of that as well, with these really weird and sort of proto-satanic films that were being made. And this was also a proto-feminist period. As you've heard Rachel probably discuss in her talks, this was the feminism of this time, and many of these girls were also, hardcore feminists. So, not by accident, but by design. Now, a lot of these people didn't know that they were following a trend by design. They were just thought they were being cool and hipsters of the time or whatever, but they were actually following a created, designed military psychological warfare strategy, right? From Wellington House, Kurt Lewin, Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays, John Rawlings Rees, on and on and on. There's tons of these people. Eventually, Tavistock, I think, at one point gets, they have a whole committee where it's like 100 people just on this stuff, on culture change back in this day. So you understand, what you think is, quote, conspiracy theory has nothing to do with conspiracy theory. It has to do with control. And it has to do with, what is it? What was Lippmann's first book? Public Opinion. So this is prior to propaganda, right? And this is about, again, from Tavistock, this is about not just steering, but creating public opinion. And then one of the first things they did was study and master the technique of polls. Polling and pollsters, Gallup polls, comes from Tavistock. They created pollsters. Now, we don't really care about this much anymore in the internet age, but in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, they figured out that if you just put up fake-ass polls saying 80% of Americans support the war, you don't want to be a weirdo in the 20%, are you? You weirdo? Are you a weirdo in the 20% that doesn't? And it was just made up. They just said 80% support. And all the people at that time just defaulted because people were a lot more trusting of authority. Well, if 80% of people said it, I guess I believe it. I don't want to be on the outside of it. I want to be a part of the group. And they said, aha, you see, this is how we get them to be part of the group. The groupthink. Groupthink. Which is the thing they came up with. Groupthink. So they studied the fact that people wanted to be part of groups. They don't like to be outsiders typically. And so you just tell people that be a part of the group. Support the effort. Why are you supporting the evil foreign barbarians? Are you a foreign agent? Do you work for Putin? Are you an agent of Saddam, the butcher of Baghdad? It's funny they didn't use that line, right? Agent. Nobody had called anybody an agent of Saddam, like in the 90s. You an agent of Saddam Hussein. But by the way, the CIA is who trained Saddam, by the way. Do you remember that? Has everybody forgotten this classic? Our buddy over there. Hey, wait a minute. How's he our buddy when the CIA trained him and the CIA armed him for his Iran-Iraq war? Oh, well, see, he was cool then, but we decided he wasn't cool a couple years later, right? So there's Rumsfeld chilling with Saddam and that mega stash. Saddam's got a damn mustache, dude. That could give any 80s black dude mustache a run for his money. With that Saddam mustache. Anyway. So. This is the creation of the star. Okay. So you think celebrities, that's some new thing. No, this was studied in the 20s and 30s. And they figured out, let's just take these chicks and put them up there with wild haircuts and tell them that they're feminists, and the whole culture will follow them. And they studied it as a science. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a science. The science of molding and shaping public opinion and perception. And not only that, changing identity. Changing identity is something that Kurt Lewin was a key figure in perfecting. Now, a couple of the techniques I want to talk about that he highlights is Kurt Lewin came up with this idea, what he called topological psychology. This is the most advanced form of behavioral modification. So it's a very precise technique of behavioral modification. And believe it or not, many generals back at this time, CEOs, university heads, okay, so they basically took the cream of the crop. They would send them to study under people that ran the Ford Foundation, people that run the Rockefeller Foundation. They would go and study under Kurt Lewin to learn behavior modification. Not any old behavior modification, but specifically topological psychology that Lewin was a expert at. And in fact, according to the arguments of Dr. John Coleman, that classic text that we've all heard about, Changing Images of Man, Willis Herman, that's actually a Kurt Lewin spawned text. So yes, it is Willis Herman, but Harman is getting a lot of this, according to Dr. John Coleman, from Kurt Lewin. And that is one of the most important. I'm not talking about the Joseph Campbell book. I'm talking about this book. So do not get this confused with Joseph Campbell's book. Changing Images of Man is the Stanford Research white paper that is of crucial importance. Put out by Pergamon Press, Oxford. You can't hardly find it. 1982. This actually comes, though, from the means, methods, and models of Lewin, according to Dr. John Coleman. And that does make sense because you'll notice that humanist psychology is the journal of Kurt Lewin's collaborator, Dr. John Rawling Rees, who was a British spy. I think he was British intelligence and then also a psychological warfare expert. Yes. This character. So this is also one of the key Tavistock figures. CBE. What is this? One of those? Oh, Order of the British Empire. Yeah. You can always, when you see people Order the British Empire, you know they are part of this inner core, usually. Rees was director of Tavistock Clinic for many years in the World Federation for Mental Health. And by the way, if you're wondering, yes, this is why many of the MK Ultra doctors were part of the psychiatric establishment, is because America's MK Ultra comes out of Tavistock's research. Rees was also a Freudian, so there's a lot of Freudian stuff in this. This also ties in with Phoenix program. So Rees has a connection to the Phoenix program? Oh, I didn't know that. Or no, Operation Phoenix. What is that? Oh, let's see what this is. After the war, Tavistock underwent considerable changes, and Rees played a key role. He was a member of a group that referred to themselves as the Invisible College. There you go. Illuminate and confirm. In reference to the 17th century precursor to the Royal Society, the Royal Society used to be called the Invisible College. This group orchestrated Operation Phoenix, making plans for Tavistock to rise from the ashes of the war. Okay, so post-World War II, you get the rise to prominence of Tavistock, and they called that Operation Phoenix. After the war, this group, including Rees and 5 others, that would also probably be Dr. Kurt Lewin, formed the Interim Planning Committee for Tavistock, chaired by Wilfred Bion, meeting twice a week based on their wartime experience. Rees's plan for the Institute of Medical Psychology were never realized. Instead, the group went on to become Tavistock Institute through Rockefeller Foundation money. There you go. So another one of those key figures. Now, changing images of man. Got to that part. One of the things that Tavistock had to do, though, was also sell American involvement in both wars. So we know about World War I. Well, they also were involved in convincing popular opinion to go along with and join in the World War II war effort. So it wasn't just the British intelligence operatives that came over, like Noel Coward, Ian Fleming, William Stevenson, that set up the OSS with Bill Donovan. It was also they also needed beyond setting up that proto-CIA, the ability to influence the mass American public mind, particularly on the war effort. Thus, all of that Bernays propaganda, Lippmann public opinion research, playing into polling, playing into using the Hollywood stars, right? All of that, music, pop culture, to get America behind the war effort. So it was all those things. Thus, the culture creation. Other key figures that played a role at this point were Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. Margaret Mead, of course, being the pseudo-anthropologist fraudster who was exposed as a phony baloney, but she was successful enough, even as a phony baloney, in convincing people to, she actually came up with these Tavistock type terms like the noble savage, right? I'm pretty sure that's a Margaret Mead idea, right? And that the idea that indigenous people are better, their society is superior to any other. It's more spiritual, bro. I'm going down to Peru to participate in brujo ayahuasca ceremonies because it's more spiritual than like America or whatever. That's all this kind of stuff. And Mead and Bateson was one of the key people who she was married to him, right? Yeah, she married Bateson. Gregory Bateson was an MK Ultra doctor, and he's one of the big pushers of LSD. So all of the anarcho-primitivism and archaic revival, that comes from these people, Mead and Bateson and these characters. But you think that the 60s counterculture revolution is a counterculture. No. It's a Tavistock-designed pseudo-counterculture from Mead and Bateson, and based on the 1920s and 30s pseudo-countercultural revolution of that time, which was studied by Tavistock as well. Remember, we were talking about the 1890s. Even in the 1890s, the Fabians were ahead of that. The Fabians were pushing degenerate art in Britain in the 1890s. So they were 20 or 30 years ahead, 40 years ahead of the 1920s and 30s. And that was 30 years ahead of the 1960s revolution. Three-system response is one of these methods that Tavistock came up with. And this is, when you hear people talk about problem, reaction, solution, or crisis management, future shock in terms of steering the public. This is a 3-system response model, according to Dr. Coleman, of contrived crises that are created or controlled or co-opted to direct to a desired outcome. So, for example, we want to manage the crises in order to get to a already predetermined outcome. So in this model, this doesn't mean there are no natural disasters, there are no crises, there are no, crazy people that go out and do crazy things. Yeah, that happens. But this model is a specifically engineered model. For example, sinking of the Lusitania. For example, right? Gulf of Tonkin. For example, Big 9 event. Not happenstance events, big catalyzing events intended to get people on board with an end goal. That's the purpose of those events. I mean, they serve other purposes too, but you know what I'm saying. So basically, the 3-system response is crisis and panic, stage 1. Big event occurs. Okay, people don't know what's going on. The system is fluid. We're waiting on updates. Let's go to Zip Zibler in the field. Zip, are you there? I'm here, Chris. The bombs are going off right now over my head. Right? This kind of a thing. That being televised is a Rand Corporation Tavistock thing. 24-hour war, televised war. Desert Storm, that was cooked up by Rand Corporation. And by the way, the people from Tavistock went and lectured at Rand. So it's the same people, same stuff. So stage 1 of the 3-system response is panic, crisis. This throws everybody off. And this leads to a fragmentation. Stage 2 of the 3-system response is fragmentation, where people freak out, they divide, they argue with each other. We don't know what's going on, let's have a fight, let's argue over it. And then the third phase for what they call passive maladaptation. And this was a guy named Dr. Emery from Tavistock who cooked this up. Crisis response, crisis management models, which are able to steer violent social changes and future shocks to a desired outcome. The third stage is fantasy trip and dissociation. So essentially trauma-based mind control. So a giant catalyzing event, Big 9. Everybody's panicking. What's going on? Now everybody's arguing. It was the Muslims. It was Osama bin Laden. It was Saddam Hussein. It was this. It was that. It was the terror. It was blah, blah, blah. George W. did it. Freaking out. Fragmentation. Then the next phase is people are so upset and distraught that they retreat into fantasy worlds. They don't want to deal with it. They walk away. And then they're primed for where they wanted to steer you from the outset. So, and we've covered those events elsewhere, other than YouTube, my Rockfin channel. I have a whole, lectures on the Big 9 event. If you want to see my take on that, everybody should be able to figure out, right, what the Big 9 event does. The Big 9 event allows for the giant security state. We get Homeland Security, we get TSA, we get all of that and more, right? We get, we got to go into Afghanistan. We got to run poppy fields. Right, because of the Big 9 event, right? It makes no sense, but it doesn't matter because the 3-system process of crisis response management has been effectively engineered, and that's why the same things that happen in, say, World War I, people aren't America's isolationist, Tavistock term. We have a big catalyzing event. You don't want to sit on the sidelines and let the Kaiser and all these evil people get away with their butchery, do you? You don't support the beast, the Kaiser, the beast, do you? So you got to get on board. Your opinion has been formed and shaped. You thought you had a public opinion that was your own opinion. No, the opinion was given to you by Tavistock. Passive maladaptation is it's called. Welcome everybody. If you would hit like and share, we have a nice 930. That's a nice intimate little almost 1,000 people on a Monday night. I like it. Thank you so much for joining me. We're talking about the classic Dr. John Coleman text, which I did get a hold of, not the physical form, unfortunately. It is problem, reaction, solution, but this is a more sophisticated psychiatrist version of it for psychological warfare. So, the making of public opinion, right? We talked about that. By the way, I want to remind you guys too, if you want the best in supplements, my sponsor is, of course, chalk.com. If you head on over to chalk.com right now, you can get access to the best supplements out there. Head on over there to choq.com. I will put the link in the show notes and in the chat live right now for you. We'll go to super chats in a bit. I got some more to get through. This is only half of it. This is a power-packed book. So we've only gotten kind of into the first half. But if you head on over to chalk.com, you can get access right now to something like 7 Wonders, which is amazing for it's basically all of the best mushrooms, legal mushrooms, that you can supplement your mineral deficiencies with, right? This is great for detoxing. It's great for inflammatory response, great for neurological health. But I mean, Chalk has everything over there. If you head on over to the Male Vitality Stack right here, STAQ, you're going to get some daily, some ashwagandha, and some Tonkat Elite. Now, the Tonkat's my favorite because it's like straight up boosts testosterone. And you can read the papers over here at Chalk. And you'll notice too, you've got basically almost 300 4-star reviews, right? 4 out of 5 stars. Most of these are, legit, like 100%. Right? There's a couple haters, but that's like a few haters amongst 300, right? So check out the Male Chalk stack. I take Tonkat almost every day. I cycle off of it every now and then just to take a break. But if you're a lady, guess what? There's also female vitality. So you can head on over to Chalk right now and use the promo code J50, that's JAY50, to get 50% off Chalk's products. And hey, this is not like some lame thing where, they gave me money and I just talk about it. I actually use Chalk and have been using it for a year and a half now. So yeah, this is legit, 100% real stuff. It's a real sponsor. They didn't just pay me money to talk about it. I actually eat it. So, and I think I brought a bottle of Tonkat with me. So even if I'm traveling, I still take the Tonkat. So again, promo code JAY50 gets you 50% off Chalk right now. But there's also the recurring subscription, right? So if you wanted to get that a one-time buy, you can do it. But you can also set up delivery for, say, every 21 days, every 3 weeks, right? And you use the coupon code there. Your promo code is J53LIFE. That's JAY53LIFE. 53% off. And then you can just have it recurring. Have it coming back every month. Also, every 3 weeks. If you want to get tickets to our event, we will be live in Nashville. Our next upcoming event is June 3rd and 4th. It's a 2-day event. Look at all these interesting people. You see that guy right there? That big boy right there? He's going to be there. That we can't name. I don't know some of these people. You might know these people. You recognize them too? You probably recognize them too. Ryan, you recognize that dude. We all know that guy. Scott Armstrong. Some musicians. You probably recognize Matt Baker. Dr. Ben Marble. Susie Corgan. There's some comedians that are coming. Our buddy Steve from Slow News Day that we just did an interview with. His co-host Craig Jardula. Chase Haggard. You guys ever heard of Chase Haggard? Well, look at that. Chase Haggard and Pablo Cardona, the Gypsy Swing Duo. Yes, they will be performing. And you guys may remember my interview with John Klychek, School World Order, a couple years ago. John's going to be there. Don't know these people. Not being a dick. I just honestly don't know who these people are. So, why you say you don't know me, man? I know, I'm sorry, man. I just don't know who you are. I'm sure you're a cool dude. So, there you go. There's tickets for that 2-day event. Head on over there to Rebels for Cause. That's Courtney's event. And, as you guys know, our big event, LA, baby. Jamie Kennedy, Dyer, Jamie Henshaw, July 6th in Los Angeles. It's going to be a cool event. Van Nuys Airport. It's a super neat venue. A lot of neon signs everywhere. Head on over right there and get tickets to our event in Los Angeles, July 6th. And you guys know our events. A lot of people in the audience have been to our live events. They're like a party, basically. It's 5 hours of chilling, joking around, having fun, impressions, and then you get me doing serious lecture, you get Jamie doing a serious lecture, and then you get Jamie Kennedy doing stand-up. You get to meet Jamie Kennedy. I mean, that's going to be a blast. And Jamie's a badass dude. So get those tickets. Those are also in the show description. And I want to say, and they're also right here in the chat, July 6th. So come on out there if you're in the Los Angeles, Burbank area, roughly. If you're anywhere in California, come. I don't care if you're not in the Burbank area. If you're in the freaking Malibu, Topanga Canyon, if you're in B-Rad's, if you're Malibute, B-Rad area, still come, because you're going to get to meet B-Rad. How could you pass that up? Get your tickets, dude. And yes, we will sign books. I will have books there. Absolutely. It's all there. So you get my cringe core comedy for 45 minutes. Can't beat that. You get Jamie's lecture on Hollywood, hour and a half. You get my lecture on my philosophy book, hour and a half. You get Jamie Kennedy doing his stand-up. You just can't beat that. And yes, book signing, autographs, all that. Also, our show sponsor, as you guys know, is not just Chalk.com. It's also Grand Theft World. Our buddy Richard Grove has one of the baddest podcasts out there. Badass. I don't say baddest like bad, like no good. I mean like the best, right? Our buddy Richard Grove. Head on over to tragedyandhope.com, or you can head over to Grand Theft World, or you can head over to Rockfin. And if you sign up on Rockfin, you get access to everybody, right? So everybody's got free content on Rockfin, great free speech-based platform, but everybody has paid content. And Richard played some of my clips last night, the Tucker clip. So they were having a good time playing that. So head on over to Grand Theft World, Richard Grove on Rockfin, and subscribe there. And I will put that link here as well. Again, guys, please, you got to get over on Rockfin, because a lot of the content that you can't do over here, you can go get it over there. All right. So let's get back to some of the key points here. The term invisible government, that's used by H.G. Wells. It's used by Bernays. We mentioned that earlier. Lippmann's Public Opinions, written in 1922. These are key Tavistock texts. So in other words, we didn't even realize it, but now we know. The two H.G. Wells books that we've lectured through, New World Order and Open Conspiracy, those are actually Tavistock texts. And Lippmann, I think he came up with this idea of the pictures in the head and the outside world. And the question is, every human being has these pictures in his head of how the outside world works and what's going on in the world. And most of the time, those things aren't actually correct, especially as we get into big world scale events, right? The average person kind of doesn't really know what's going on. And they have a relationship to more localized events or to their people that they know. They have a better sense of those things, obviously. But these pictures in the head don't always match up to the pictures in the real world, according to Lippmann. And so the key way to manipulate the individual is to manipulate the pictures to change the pictures in his head. So the external world, the external stimuli, Pavlovian type of stuff, right, manipulates and changes the individual's mind, and the individual has a role in also changing society. So that's that feedback loop that these guys are so interested in. How do we change? But it's not just about individuals. It's about changing the pictures, the imagery and iconography of a society to change the thoughts and the pictures in the head of not just individuals, but the herd mind, literally call it the herd mind. Okay. And they said early on, H.G. Wells said TV is key. And that is why Bernays and William Paley went to be the key guys at CBS early on. So when they created the networks, basically OSS, CIA, And then Tavistock people went to run the networks from the beginning of the networks. Princeton Research Project. I covered this in my book. You guys probably have heard of this. This is the Orson Welles radio project. So when Orson Welles broadcast as a joke, quote unquote, the War of the Worlds broadcast on the radio, many people freaked out. People thought that aliens were really invading. Orson Welles did a broadcast of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. And I don't know how people thought this was real, but goofballs thought it was real. And they were freaking out. That was part of the Princeton Research Project. And one of the key figures at Princeton who was connected to and working with Tavistock is Hadley Cantrell. I've mentioned this. It's in my first or second book when I talk about alien baloney. And it's called Invaders from Mars. Invasion from Mars, excuse me. In 1940. So here is a Tavistock individual, connected individual, writing for Princeton Research Project. It's not a science fiction book. It's a study in the psychology of panic. Do you see that? It's not a conspiracy book. Idiots out there that think this is some dumb conspiracy. This is Princeton Research Project. A study in the psychology of panic. What might we study the psychology of panic for? Can you guys think? What modern type of warfare might we study panic for? The war on... Do you need George Bush's out there? Terror. The war on terror. Gonna have a war on terror. Let's declare a war on ism. Declare a war on... How do you declare a war on a place that's not a country? War, legally, is declared via Congress on a country. You can't declare a war on an ideology. But if you are a Tavistock mind control operative, then absolutely you can. And this allows for all kinds of amazing psychological warfare manipulation techniques. And that's exactly what the last 20 or so years of the war on TERO, or war on terror, mustard gases, WMDs. But as Dr. Coleman argues, actually Tavistock declared war on the U.S. That's what's really going on. And that's why you always hear me saying that, no, the actual target population is not a foreign population, right? It's not Iraq. I mean, yeah, you get the death of 1 million Iraqis probably, right? So I'm not saying there's not a real war. There is. But I'm saying that the real subject is you, the viewer of the 24-hour televised war on Iraq. America at war, right? You're the target. The war's against you because of the psychology of panic. All right, well, in the second half, we're going to get into a lot more of this, the making of public opinion. We're going to get into characters like Darwin Cartwright. We're going to get more into Bernays, the notion in 1955, a key text called Engineering Consent. We're going to talk more about John Rawling Rees and his Institute for Social Research, which is Tavistock in the United States. We're going to talk about the Aspen Institute, which is one of the key CFR type things. It's one of these high-level think tank committee type groups in America. We're going to talk about Hadley Cantrell's Office of Public Opinion Research, OPOR. We are going to talk about Willis Harman. We're going to talk about British intelligence again, and this system of identity change that Dr. Kurt Lewin came up with, which is he called it a two-phase space. I don't know if he just made this up to sound fancy, but there is a two-phase space approach that Tavistock cooked up with relating to the environment and the self, and the third variable, they call it, which is used by British intelligence for all extraction or information extraction processes. It's used in dealing with foreign enemies, foreign dignitaries. It's an approach to any kind of situation where you want to get a person to change their mind, to change their identity. So it's beyond changing your mind. It's actually changing your identity. And it has to do with environmental and external pressures by the time of Kurt Lewin, but this actually changes later on to be more about the manipulation of the self. And this actually plays into Guantanamo Bay, actually. So Dr. Coleman makes a big point of explaining how Lewin's phase space model for identity change is used in the operations at Guantanamo Bay. All right, super chats. What's up? Let's see, we got several here. If you want to support the show, guys, you can do so via the super chat function, which is via Streamlabs. So use the Streamlabs link. So cool that we got right at about 1,000. I think we almost touched 1,000 earlier on. That's great for a Monday night. But yeah, so I was talking about this book this week. So if you guys want to get my red book, it is all of my geopolitical, philosophical, theological essays compacted together in 660 pages. So it's pretty cool to get all of them, I guess, for $45. So if you go to the shop of the website, which I think is linked in the show description, you can get signed copies of the totality text of all of what I wrote, probably from 2010 to 2030, I think 2010 to 2020, basically. It's like all of the essays of 10 years of what I wrote. So it does not have the movie stuff, right? So the movies, none of them, there's no movie stuff in that. It's just theology and philosophy essays for 10 years. All the movie stuff is in the esoteric Hollywood books. So I don't have the book cam because I'm not at home. I'm on the road at an Airbnb, so we don't have the book cam. And I would be more ridiculous, but I'm tired because we had a long drive. So Kristen, $5, thank you so much. And she says, "Pay piggy" with imagery. She uses hieroglyphics and imagery to say "pay piggy." Kentucky Squirrel, $10. I want to say thank you. Your debates help me come to orthodoxy. Stay based. I will not. I'm going to be completely blue pilled from now on. I'm quitting based and joining Team Blue Pill. Just kidding. Thank you, Kentucky Squirrel. Kevin Farrell, $5. Thanks always, Jay. Thank you, Kevin Farrell. Much appreciated. BM Duper, $5. Jay was too mean to Klaus. Klaus called up Fox and said, "Kanzerjatoka. You made a Bond villain cope and seethe. Use the chalk advertisement and promote, insert victory chalk advertisement here." Yeah, chalk and myself fueled the seething of Klaus. Daddy, $5. I appreciate you, mate. Thank you, Daddy. Kumpad Polly. T. I don't know, T. Kumpad Polly. Polly Walnuts, 888. Have you seen Mickey the Clown skateboard surfing? Mickey the Clown sings skateboard surfing. I do not. No idea what that is. It is a 90s psyop funded by the Rothschilds. Okay. I will have to see. What is it called? Mickey the Clown skateboard surfing. I'm afraid to look it up. Mark, $5. Are there other organizations the same scale, sophistication as Tavistock? Absolutely. But they're not a rivalry. Rand Corporation. Okay. Brookings Institute. Albert Einstein Institute. I mean, you guys understand there's like a million of the top think tanks and foundations. And they all do the same types of stuff, right? I can't tell what these are. A lot of these are just a lot of these are created for certain areas, like the Korean Development Institute. I have no idea what that is, but obviously it's dealing with Korea. But typically when we talk about this, we're talking about the most powerful think tanks, like Brookings Institute, Carnegie, CSIS, right? These kinds of things. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Rand Corporation. There used to be a helpful diagram that somebody had many years ago that had all the top ones on it. Let's see what this is. No, that's not helpful. Because a lot of them are like, what is this? It's just relating to something in China. But, let's see. Brookings, CFR, Carnegie, Ford, Soros, Rand. But yeah, I mean, you could look this up on your own. It's not that. This doesn't even list anything. It was just worthless essay. Anyway, you get the idea. So, I mean, MIT. I mean, they're all interconnected. Jallison, 1987, $5. Tavistock be gossiping. Throw it down with Tim Capello. Well, Tim Capello used to be like super buff dude, right? Like that dude would probably whip me easily. But is he still super buff, dude? He looks pretty buff, even as a full-on boomer, man. Like he's full-on boomer, but he's still buff saxophone man. So he might still be able to beat me up. What do you guys think? Probably. Surplus guy. I saw a video you did with long hair. Yep, that was a long time ago. It looked cool. I never expected that. Now you're growing it long again. Yeah, ironically, it was back when I did the Tragedy and Hope lectures. So it was all the way down my back in, I don't know, 2016, somewhere in there. I think I did the Tragedy and Hope. We lectured through the totality of Tragedy and Hope in 2016. So that's probably when you're referring to it. Through Human Eyes, $20. Thank you, Jay Dyer. Thank you, Through Human Eyes. You sound like a British synth pop band, so I'll take that. I'll take it. You probably made millions of dollars in the 1980s from your Brit pop, synth pop hits. Through Human Eyes. Through human eyes, I see you. Through human eyes. Right, something like that. Anyway, if you guys would like and share, comment. And part 2 of this will be up in the next few days. I did get the part 2 to the Huxley lecture up. And as soon as Patrick Wood feels good, if he recovers from his surgery soon enough, he'll be on and we'll talk about his technocracy books. I mean, I'm enjoying his Trilaterals book. So it's got a lot of information I didn't know in there. A lot of corporations that were pushing all this same, technocratic stuff in the 70s.